Joel is only 3 chapters long, but Joel spoke of things happening to the very end of God's prophetic calendar. So we're going to take time to go through those events. What was Joel talking about? Let's look first. Let's review the kings. There were 20 kings, like there were in Israel. And all of Israel's kings were evil. 2 of them were chosen by the Lord, Jeroboam I and Jehu. The others either got the throne through their father, and not many of those even lasted long enough, a few. But many of them killed the king and took the throne themselves. This is how bad things were. Now, going back about 200 years of the history of the nation, and we'll be repeating some of the things, maybe adding some things to it with the kings. Because we've already covered some of those that when it involved the southern kings. Let's review these and see. Rehoboam served for 41 years, ruled for years of reign. He was 41 when he came to the throne, ruled 17 years. He was not quite all bad. This is somebody else's chart. There was a little while when God did bless Judah over Israel, and he did do a couple of things that pleased God. I call him fair to bad. Abijah, 3-year reign, almost the same as his father Rehoboam, but he was pretty bad. Asa was a good king. He ruled 41 years. And look, they were fighting one another with the northern kingdom. These were all God's people, but they were at war, killing one another. To the tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. Jehoshaphat was a good king. He ruled 25 years, and there was peace during his kingdom. Peace at a price, though, because he made so many pacts with the northern kingdom and intermarried. His family intermarried with the northern kingdom, with Ahab and Jezebel's family, which brought many of the princes in Israel to their death, which was very sad. But he was a good king. He did a lot of things that were good. Jehoram was not a good king. Ahaz, 22, he ruled 32 years. There was peace under Jehoram. There was an alliance again with Ahaziah, 22 years old, and he only ruled 1 year. He was bad. There was an alliance with the northern kingdom. Athaliah shouldn't have even been on the throne. She stole it she was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, and she was as evil as her mother. And she killed her own grandchildren in order to take the throne for 6 years. Thought she killed all of them. You know, this is the devil's way of trying to keep God's word from coming to pass, because he said one of the seed of David would always be on the throne. So the devil thought that he had made it, that David's seed would not be on the throne, so the devil took the throne. I call her the devil because she was so bad. She was worse than bad. She was wicked, very wicked. She ruled 6 years, and they killed her when they brought the young king out. He was just a baby when he escaped her massacre of her own family, and his name was Joash. He was a good king but he did some things that were wrong. He ended up in disfavor with God, in fact. He ruled 40 years, and there was peace. Amaziah ruled 29 years, fairly good king. Uzziah, his name was Azariah or Uzziah. Most people know him as Uzziah. He was a good king. He ruled 52 years. But nearly all of these kings, they were not perfect. They did some things that were pretty bad. Uzziah did. And sometimes it would be at the end of their life. Jotham ruled 16 years. He was a fairly good king. Ahaz was wicked. He was worse than bad. Hezekiah was an excellent king. He wasn't just good. I would classify him as being an excellent king. Almost as good as David. Manasseh was very bad. He ruled 55 years. Ahaz and Manasseh even offered their children in sacrifice, just like the neighbors round about. They were doing such bad things. Amon ruled 2 years, bad. Josiah was a good king. He was the man that cleared all of the junk out of the country that all of the other good kings had overlooked. And it was amazing how many times they house cleaned, but they didn't find everything. And God had spoken through the young prophet that went over to Jeroboam 1 and said the time would come when he's going to destroy all of the works of these evil priests. You remember that prophecy? It happened through Josiah. Jehoaz, from Josiah, he cleared out the land. Must have pleased God when the land was as clean as it could be from idolatry under him. But from there on down, they were getting ready to go into Babylonian captivity because every one of these, his brothers, his children, every one of these were very bad. They were evil. They were wicked. Until finally God took the nation of Judah into Babylonian captivity in order to save them. If you notice, they didn't rule too long either. 3 months, 11 years, 3 months, 11 years. So this is the picture of what was going on throughout the kingdom of Judah. There's some exciting lessons coming along, especially their Babylonian captivity, their release from Babylonian captivity, their restoration to the land. It's one of my favorite parts of my study is the restoration period under Ezra and Nehemiah. Let's look at a map. Here we have all of the kings again of Judah, kings and one queen, of course. And if I didn't have to, I wouldn't even mention her because she wasn't worth mentioning. She was a terrible. By this time, Israel is gone, most of them. There were a few people that were left in the land that were intermarried, if you remember, with the pagan people that the king of Assyria sent into the land. Now, these were the places of idolatry, and there was one also in the north in Dan. And this was the capital of the northern kingdom. And the capital had to be taken before the northern kingdom finally disappeared into the hands of those really terrorist nation or empire, the Assyrians. You'll probably never forget some of the things that happened to the Lord's people there. And Assyria had really taken over some of the villages, small villages around Jerusalem, but God would not allow them to go into Jerusalem because his glory was still there, his presence was still there, and they were not to touch Jerusalem. But they had come in and they had captured some of the villages even of Judah. Okay, let's look at page 235 and just read the introduction. After completing the history of the northern kingdom, we now go backward in history about 200 years to observe the Lord's dealings with Judah. It's the only way you can divide it up to know which kings belong to which empire or kingdom. Otherwise, you wouldn't know when you read the Bible if they were a Judean king or if they were a king of Israel. So I worked a lot of years to divide this up for you so it would be a little easier. But the way we study, we have to go backward now and study Judah. The history of Judah is different from that of Israel in many ways. For the temple and many Levites were there. And I'd like to say here that likely the priests, see there were Levitical cities all over the nation. That included the northern kingdom. And if you remember, Baasha, the northern king, tried to bar one of the main highway going to Jerusalem because evidently too many people were going back to Judah to worship. And I would say that possibly those that were true priests and Levites in the Levitical cities likely went back to Judah. It was interesting. I was listening to a teacher on television the other day, and in fact, he's a teacher that is known all over the world. I highly respect him as a student or a teacher of the Word of God. He's really good. He's probably had a lot of training in science as well. And he made a statement that was wrong. He said it's a myth that there were 10 lost tribes. And he based that on the fact that in New Testament days there were a few people that said they were from various tribes. Anybody that doubts that there were lost tribes, I don't know what they're thinking about, just basing it on a few names. Because certainly there were people that came in from the northern kingdom. But there were people scattered all over the earth. We're going to read some about it today. I mean, the seed of Israel went into every country in the world, and God has been bringing them back for the last 100 years. And it's absolutely false to say that there were not the lost tribes of Israel. They were not lost to themselves, but they were lost to the rest, to the Jewish world, generally speaking. But God knew where they were, and he began to put it in their heart to come back to the land. And they're coming back to the land. Not all are back. Those that God has called back are coming back. They will never all go back. It is always in the kingdom of God and in the plan of God and the nation of God, it's always been he fulfilled his purposes through a remnant. A remnant is 10%, okay? There were 10% in Persia that were restored to the land to rebuild the land. Only 10% of the people in Persia. Following the establishment of pagan worship by Jeroboam I, a great number of Levites and others left the northern kingdom to worship in Jerusalem. And I believe that many of them stayed there, thus strengthening the spiritual element of Judah. Of Judah's 20 kings, 7 were classified good to excellent. This differed from the kings of Israel, for all of them were evil. Israel saw the fall of 9 dynasties, but all of the kings of the southern kingdom, from Rehoboam to Zedekiah, were part of the dynasty of David. So there's only one dynasty in Judah. The Lord promised the continuity of David's kingdom. So even when the rulers were very wicked, God was faithful to his promise to David. Because of Judah's better record, her history was extended 134 years beyond the fall of this proud and arrogant Israel. Finally, Judah also sold herself into exile for her sins. There was a difference in Judah's captivity. However, Israel was scattered throughout the nations for an indefinite period until the latter days, really, the prophets said. But Judah's exile were for only 70 years. The southern kingdom eventually was restored to the promised land. For the prophets of the Lord had foretold that Messiah would come through the line of Judah and would also be born in Bethlehem. That had to come to pass. We're going to cover all of several kings tonight, and then we're going to go into Joel, which we will probably spend more time in. Rehoboam. And as I told you before, many times, many of these people were named wrong, because a name is supposed to be the character, and they nearly all had a good name, but it was not really the right name. His name was enlarger of the people. He didn't have Jehovah added to his name. He had an Ammonite mother. He began to rule when he was 41 years old. Ruled 17 years, as we have already seen. He sent Hadoram, a man in charge of Levi, to draft workers from the 10 tribes. But if you remember, he had his coronation up in Ephraim. He went to the north. And so he was to consult the young men and the older men as to what he's going to do about taxes. Well, they had been taxed to death under Solomon, if you remember, to support all of his hobbies and all of his building program and all of his big family, all the things that he had done. And so he listened to the young men and not to the older men. The older men said, love the people and they'll serve you. At that point, even though God said that he had divided it, he had a chance to, at least for a time, maybe win over the northern kingdom. You know, I'll just add this. I was thinking about, we talked about Jonah last week. And I'll say the same thing about Rehoboam. God so often used the second generation, sometimes he did, in a greater way than he did the first generation. Like Elijah was used, but that generation, Elisha, he was like his son, second generation, was used in a greater way. And if you remember, the servant of Elisha, he sold out because he was greedy. You remember? We don't know how God might have used him. Maybe even in a greater way. And I feel same way about Rehoboam. And the same way about Jonah that we talked about last week. Who knows what he could have done to those people in Nineveh that had been in sackcloth, that had been fasting, if he had stayed and taught them. And many of these were young people that God said they don't know their right hand from their left. They don't know. In a sense, they're innocent people. But he was angry. But how God might have used him and changed the future maybe of that capital city, if they had known anything about Jehovah God and began to serve him and not turned again to idolatry. He had his chance. Rehoboam has his chance, all right? But he listened to the young people, and he said, "You think that that my father taxed you heavily." I'm paraphrasing a little. "But you haven't seen anything yet." And they said, "Son of David, we don't have to serve you." And he went home, all right? And so he drafted this man, and he sent him to collect taxes from them. And he fled to Jerusalem and began to prepare for war. And this man was stoned in the northern kingdom. God spoke to the prophet Shemaiah that Rehoboam should not go against Israel, for he was in the division. God said, "I'm in the division." Rehoboam obeyed Jeroboam, fearing to lose his people, set up calf worship. Rehoboam built cities and began to strengthen Judah. He had war in mind. He fortified strongholds, and he put captains in them, and he stocked them with all kinds of supplies. He put shields and spears in every city. For a time he walked in the way of David and Solomon. This is what I said before. He wasn't totally evil. For a time he did walk in the way of the Lord, although he was doing things that were really against God. He married a lot of wives like his fathers behind him. He had concubines, and he fathered many children. After establishing his kingdom, Rehoboam forsook the law of the Lord, and he allowed the people to build shrines and establish idol worship on every high hill. This is the thing that many good kings seem to ignore. There was only one place that the people were to worship, and where was that? At the temple in Jerusalem. This is where God's presence was. They were not to worship anywhere else. And just because they didn't have idols, many of the kings still allowed these high places on the hills where people would go to meditate and who knows what else. But it was a type of worship that God did not condone. And some of the kings did not realize how bad this was. He also allowed homosexuality. The people became as depraved as the Canaanites. In the 5th year, Egypt brought in a large number of chariots and cavalrymen and infantry from many nations and subdued many of the cities of Judah. Leaders fled to Jerusalem. God sent a message to Rehoboam that he would not completely destroy him, but he must pay tribute to Egypt from there on. The Egyptian king conquered Jerusalem and stole much of the wealth that Solomon had accumulated. Rehoboam humbled himself, and God allowed him to remain strong. During his 17 years, there was continual strife with Israel. He died and was buried in Jerusalem. His mistakes were: he invited danger by going to Shechem to be crowned. He vacillated. He could not. Had a feeble character. He could not make a rule and stand on it. He was foolish in turning to the youth of the nation. Leaving the elders in contempt. He sent the tax collector shouting defiance and insolence to the people of the northern kingdom. He rejected the people's Bill of Rights. He was boastful of his power and abused his authority in making threats. Before we go any further, I would like to remind you of what I've told you even from the time of the judges, when it was very evident that there was a lot of friction between Ephraim and Judah. Israel, the northern kingdom, was also called Joseph because Ephraim and Manasseh were Joseph's sons. And it was all, and many times the prophets called the northern kingdom Ephraim. Ephraim had been, many good rulers had come from Ephraim. Joshua was one. And also some of the judges. But they began to show their arrogance, especially during the years of the judges. Ephraim was not satisfied with God's gifts and callings, the things that God had given them. He gave them the center of the land, the richest of the land of Manasseh and Ephraim, which was a greater amount of land. They were not satisfied with it because they wanted to be big boss. They wanted to be first, but God had ordained, and he had spoken that Judah would be the one that would be crowned. He would be the one that would lead to Messiah, the one that would carry the spiritual banner. Judah was, their land was not that great. It was stony, it was wilderness. Their inheritance was spiritual. It was not physical or natural. Ephraim had the tabernacle, you remember, for 300 years in their land before it came to Jerusalem. Manasseh also furnished many leaders, and they also were very jealous of Judah. And the jealousy was so bad that God called the first king from Benjamin, which the two of them almost destroyed in the years of the judges, if you remember. The next king is Abijah. I would consider him poor to fair, just like Rehoboam. His name meant Jehovah is my father. Here is a counterfeit name. Jeroboam I was in his 18th year of ruling Israel and ruled 3 years. His mother was from Israel, from Gibeah. He inherited his father's wars with Israel. If you remember, the first 3 kings continually had war with the northern kingdom. On an occasion following his coming to power, he took 400,000 soldiers to fight Jeroboam's army, which was twice as large. Abijah mocked Jeroboam because Judah had God's promises of the blessings of David. He reminded him that he was under a curse because he had desecrated the Lord's worship. While he talked, Jeroboam set ambushes against him. When Judah realized her armies were surrounded, she cried to the Lord, and the priests blew the trumpets, which was a type of worship, and the armies shouted, and God turned the tide and allowed them to win a tremendous victory. Judah slew 500,000 Israelites that day and chased the northern army and captured many of the northern cities. Jeroboam never regained power. Judah became strong in his 3-year reign, and Abijah married 14 wives, fathered 22 sons, and 16 daughters. After his death, there was a good king, Asa, that ruled. He was one of the better. I would say that he was a little bit better than just good. All right? Sometimes they're sort of in between, but most of the time he really did the will of God. The Lord said that his eyes had been going to and fro to find somebody that was perfected, somebody that was mature. And Asa was one that pleased God with the things that he did. The land was quiet for 10 years when he came to the throne. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He removed sodomy from the land. He removed idolatrous altars and high places. He broke images and cut down groves. He also commanded Judah to seek the Lord, which the kings were supposed to do, and to obey the Lord's commands. He removed the images and the high places from cities. He was one of the kings that had seen that these things were wrong, and he removed them, and this really pleased God. In just a few years, he did a lot of things. Asa built fenced cities and towers and gates and bars, and he gave them rest. God gave them rest and allowed Judah to prosper. You would think that these kings would have learned something from history, wouldn't you? If they didn't read the Word, and they had the priests and the Levites who were supposed to teach them the Word, and they were supposed to have mothers maybe that taught them a few things, if they were, especially if they were Israelite, the Hebrew mothers. But they never learned from all of the mistakes of the past. They did not learn. Asa's army from Judah, 300,000, bore targets and spears. His men from Benjamin, 240,000. They were also mighty men of valor that had their spears and their bows. 1 million Ethiopians came against Asa from the south, in a valley between Hebron and Ashdod. Okay, down in this area. Ashdod is down here. Hebron is up near Jerusalem. So all of these Ethiopian fighters came against Asa, all right? Asa cried for the Lord's mercy and help. He exalted God's name, and the Lord smote the Ethiopian army. Many fled, and Asa's army pursued them, overwhelmed them, and carried away much of the spoils of war. It's amazing that all of these people that came in brought, and I can understand bringing camels with them, but they brought sheep and cattle too. And I was thinking about it, why would they, bringing an army in, why would they have sheep and cattle? Maybe to kill for food. Maybe they had some kind of a sacrifice themselves, but I would rather think it was maybe for food, to feed their army while they were there. The prophet of God came to meet Asa and the army, saying, "The Lord is with you, Asa. If you seek him, he will be found of you. But if you forsake him, he'll forsake you. Seek him, he will come, he will be with you. But the day you forsake him, he'll forsake you. Be strong and let not your hands be weak, for your work will be rewarded." He took courage and put away all the abominable things, yet that maybe he found some extra things that he didn't know was there, even those taken from Ephraim. He renewed God's altar in the land. Many from the north, from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon, gathered with Judah and Benjamin in Jerusalem. They sacrificed unto the Lord, and they covenanted to seek him with all of their heart and soul. Those who would not do so would be put to death. This is I'm sure many of these were religious leaders. They swore unto the Lord, shouted, and blew trumpets and cornets. All Judah rejoiced, and God gave them rest. Asa removed his mother as queen because she had an idol hidden in a grove. He destroyed it and burned it at the brook Kidron. He did not take Again, there were high places that he did not take away, although his heart was perfect all of his days. Asa brought into God's house the gold and silver vessels that had been dedicated. And there was no war. For 18 years he had peace. In his 19th year, Baasha of the northern kingdom, we talked about that a few minutes ago, knowing that many of the people were coming in to worship in Jerusalem, he blocked the road to Jerusalem. And he wanted the people to stay in the northern kingdom and worship the golden calf, or the calf. Asa hired Ben-Hadad of Syria to attack him. Now, God didn't like that, because they were not to have any kind of alliances with pagan nations. God had his way of stopping Baasha, but he didn't trust God in this instance, and he sent a message to the king of Syria to attack Baasha so that he would leave off blocking the road. He was blocking it with some kind of building material, but he took the building material, and he built 2 cities, 2 villages. Hananiah the prophet came to Asa and rebuked him for relying on Syria instead of asking God for help. He reminded him how God had delivered him from the vast African army. Thus he said, "The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong on behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward him. Because you have been foolish, you will now have wars." You have been foolish, so I will allow wars the rest of your reign. Asa was angry, and he put the prophet in prison. Then he began to oppress some of the people. And he did something even worse. In his 39th year, his feet became diseased. He didn't seek God, but he went to physicians. Now, there's nothing wrong with us going, that might be something that somebody who's got something against doctors would say, this is a doctor and you're not supposed to go to doctor. No such thing. Physicians in those days, many of them practiced black magic. All right? This is the reason why he was not to go to a physician. He was to trust God. He died in his 41st year. He was still honored and buried in Jerusalem, highly honored with a bed of sweet spices. Jehoshaphat. I think I'm a little ahead. Sorry. He whom Jehovah judges. He was good, a little bit more than good, but he made a couple of bad mistakes as well. Jehovah began to rule. He was 35 years old. Ahab had been on the throne of the northern kingdom for 4 years. Jehoshaphat's contemporaries were Ahab, his sons, Ahijah, and Jehoram of the northern kingdom. He obeyed God's word too. He destroyed heathen altars on the hills and the idols. He closed houses of male prostitution. He didn't destroy the shrines in the hills. People sacrificed and burned incense there, and God didn't like it. He was angry. God was pleased with much of the king's actions, and he gave him favor with the people round about and also the people in the land. He became very popular and he became very wealthy. He sent officials and Levites to all of the cities to teach the law. This was one of the wonderful things that Jehoshaphat did, was send the Levites and the priests all over the nation to teach them what God had said. And this, we don't find that many, Hezekiah did the same. We don't find many of the kings that really did that. And if people do not know what God says, they make a lot of mistakes, don't they? The king placed garrisons in all of Judah's cities, including Jerusalem. He trained armies. He built fortresses and supply cities throughout the land. And the kingdom became very strong, so people round about gave him gifts in order to appease him. His greatest mistake was in arranging the marriage between his son and the daughter of wicked Ahab and Jezebel. This was a far-reaching mistake. Some years later, he visited Ahab. They became buddies. A great banquet was set, and Jehoshaphat was asked to go to battle with Ahab. You remember that from the last time when we studied Ahab and Jehoshaphat? And I said, he had a hard time saying no. Good, you know. There are people that do have a hard time saying no to people. You know? Easygoing. They're a person pleaser. Jehoshaphat was a people pleaser. He visited him, set a banquet, and Ahab said, you know, I'm fighting the Syrians over at Ramoth Gilead. I want to take that city back. So I want you to go with me. If you remember the story, Jehoshaphat said, do you have a true prophet? Do you have a prophet of the Lord? I'm not going unless a prophet tells me to go. I want to hear from God. And he said, oh, we have one that claims to be a true prophet, but he's in jail. He never told the truth. So he was in prison. And so God had sent a lying spirit into the mouths of all of the so-called false prophets that surrounded Ahab. And they were saying, oh, go to war, you're going to win this great battle. But the true prophet was brought, and he had a message from God. But anyhow, Jehoshaphat, he told him that God had sent a lying spirit into the mouths of these false prophets. And he saw Israel without a shepherd wandering around. And this was to say, Ahab, you're going to lose your life. He didn't take warning. So they went into battle. Ahab was disguised. And I think he did this on purpose, knowing they're going to go after him. And Jehoshaphat wore his kingly robes. All right? So they were going after Ahab. And Jehoshaphat barely escaped death, because they saw him with his kingly robes, and they thought for a little while it was Ahab. But God in mercy did not let them kill Jehoshaphat. Only God protected him. But they did put an arrow in the right place in the body of Ahab. And the prophet, and he was going, and Ahab would die that day. The prophet Jehu, if you remember, he was the one that God chose, and he sent a prophet to anoint him to do what? Jehu. What would he do? He was going to be the next king of Israel, but what would he do?
Ahab's house.
He was to destroy the house of Ahab. And by the way, Athaliah, you know, and they were seemingly all destroyed, even the princes that were coming in the northern kingdom to visit their cousins. They were killed, 42 of them. But Athaliah, that killed her own grandsons, they were still had the blood of Ahab in them, and Jezebel. Remember? These were her grandchildren, and she was of that line. So that was part of the cleansing of the house of Ahab, regrettably. These were the seed of David, And God in grace and mercy allowed one, even though he had some of the blood of Ahab and Jezebel in him, God still, because he was the seed of David, he would sit on the throne. This was really a terrible thing that Jehoshaphat had allowed. So the prophet met Jehu, saying that God would, the prophet, we're not quite to that yet, I'm sorry. The prophet Jehu met Jehoshaphat, saying that God was angry with him because he had allied with those that hated him. He would, however, show mercy because the king had destroyed idols, and he was of the house of David. He appointed godly judges to govern cities. He counseled them to seek God, for God demanded justice and honesty. By the way, you will find names. Jehu was a king, but he was also a prophet, all right? So don't let these names confuse you. Just see if it says king or prophet. And sometimes there were prophets that were not literary prophets that were named the same thing as the literary prophets. God demanded honesty. He set up courts in Jerusalem and appointed Levites and priests and tribal leaders and warned them that they must serve God. People came from all over the nation, all over the kingdom. At the temple court, the king stood, from all of the king, from over the kingdom. At the temple court, the king stood before the Lord, the little ones, the wives, and the children. The people came, all of these nations came in. Moab, Ammon, Edom. The people round about came in against them in war. Great, great army, and they cried out to the Lord and had a fast day and prayer. And the people came to the temple to seek the Lord, and a Levite stood up before the congregation and prophesied. Paul, would you read that prophecy? 2 Chronicles 20:15 through 20.
And he said, "Listen, all of you Judah, and you inhabitants of Jerusalem, and you King Jehoshaphat. Thus says the Lord to you, do not be afraid nor dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow go down against them. They will surely come up by the Ascent of Ziz, and you will find them at the end of the brook before the wilderness of Jeruel. You will not need to fight in this battle. Position yourselves, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord. Who is with you, O Judah and Jerusalem? Do not fear or be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord is with you." And Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem bowed before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. Then the Levites of the children of the Kohathites and the children of the Korahites stood up to praise the Lord, God of Israel, with voices loud and high.
Okay, so they rose up early in the morning and went to the wilderness of Tekoa, which was the home of Amos. You remember Amos, the Judean prophet that went over to Israel to prophesy to them? This was down in the area south of Jerusalem. Tekoa was somewhere in here. This is where they went. 2 Chronicles 20 through 30. This is what happened. They sent the choir out. They won a battle by singing praise. Okay, read that, Paul.
So they rose early in the morning and went out into the wilderness of Tekoa. And as they went out, Jehoshaphat stood and said, "Hear me, O Judah, and you inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, and you shall be established. Believe his prophets, and you shall prosper." And when he had consulted with the people, he appointed those who should sing to the Lord and who should praise the beauty of holiness as they went out before the army and were saying, "Praise the Lord, for his mercy endures forever." Now when they began to sing and to praise, the Lord set ambushes against the people of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who had come against Judah, and they were defeated. For the people of Ammon and Moab stood up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir to utterly kill and destroy them. And when they had made an end of the inhabitants of Seir, they helped to destroy one another. So when Judah came to the place overlooking the wilderness, They looked toward the multitude, and there were the dead bodies fallen on the earth. No one had escaped. When Jehoshaphat and his people came to take away their spoil, they found among them an abundance of valuables on the dead bodies, and precious jewelry, and they stripped off for themselves more than they could carry away. And they were 3 days gathering the spoil, there was so much. And on the 4th day they assembled in the valley of Berakah, for there they blessed the Lord. Therefore the name of that place was called the Valley of Berakah until this day. Then they returned, every man of Judah and Jerusalem with Jehoshaphat in front of them, to go back to Jerusalem with joy, for the Lord had made them rejoice over their enemies. So they came to Jerusalem with stringed instruments and harps and trumpets to the house of the Lord. And the fear of God was on the kingdoms of those countries when they heard that the Lord had fought against the enemies of Israel. Then the realm of Jehoshaphat was quiet, for his God gave him rest all around.
You remember the story of the king Ahab's son Jehoram that wanted Jehoshaphat to go with him to fight the Moabites because they were rebelling against the Moabites that had been charging them such high taxes. And so they wanted him to go. And he said he wouldn't go unless there was a prophet with him, so they took Elisha with them. You remember the story? Mm-hmm. And they went by way of Edom over to Moab, okay? And there was no water, and here they were facing, the Moabites were very powerful, evidently, and their armies gathered here on the borders of Moab. And of course the prophet with them, God honored what they were doing, even though there were 2 pagan kings, the one from the north and the king of Edom. And they dug ditches. The prophet told them to dig ditches. There was no water. And God filled those ditches full of water overnight. And when the Moabites got up in the morning, they looked out and they saw the sun shining on all of these ditches filled with water, and they thought these 3 kings had killed one another. Their armies had killed one another. And they came out just to finish it off. And what did they do? These people went after them. The 3 armies went after the Moabites and won a great victory that day. Again, it was because God not only honored Elisha, the prophet of the Lord, but Jehoshaphat. Again, he had a difficult time saying no, but God went with him. Now, near the end of his rule, he joined Amaziah in building ships, which was a northern king, a son of Ahab, that brought gold all the way from Spain and other countries. And Eleazar rebuked the king of Judah, saying, because you allied with the wicked, the Lord will destroy your work. And God sank their ships. And Jehoshaphat died and was buried in Jerusalem. The reign of Jehoram, and his name seemed to me exalted by Jehovah. He was evil. Jehoram was 33 years old when he began to rule, and he was king 8 years. You wonder, with a king like a father like Jehoshaphat, it seemed that he would have learned a few things under him. I'm wondering sometimes you wonder how this can happen. But if you find out who their mother was, you can figure out what happened. We'll see an instance or two. Jewish mothers, Hebrew mothers taught their sons, taught their children. But if they were from Ammon or Egypt or someplace else, they wouldn't have learned. The fathers were busy doing the work of the government, so they did not teach their children. They commanded the people round about, the religious leaders and that, to do what they could do to honor the Lord and to teach the people. But the fathers did not teach the children. All right? So this one here, you wonder who his mother was. All right? Jehoram was married to wicked Athaliah. This was the marriage that had been arranged between Ahab and Jehoshaphat. Remember? He was as evil as Ahab. He killed his brothers and many of Judah's good leaders. He rebuilt evil shrines on the hills and forced the people to bow before altars. He forced them to. God would not destroy the kingdom because he had made a covenant with David, so he still allowed him. He's going to punish him. But he still would not, he allowed him to take the throne. Edom, which had been under Judah's rule, revolted, and Jehoram made war and lost the battle and fled. Elijah was still living in the north, powerful prophet in the north, wrote a letter to Jehoram warning him that God would send a plague because of his great evil. He said, your wives and your children and all that you own will be destroyed. The king himself would die from an intestinal disease. Just like Herod the Great, their bowel rotted. They died of intestinal disease. God stirred up the Philistines to the west and the Arabs in the south. They came into the land and carried away the property, slew his wives and children. Only the youngest, Ahijah or Jehoaz, we don't know if that was a translator mistake or if he really went by two names. We don't know for sure. But he was called Jehoaz, but he was also called Ahijah. The king died as had been prophesied, but he suffered for 2 years with a disease. The king was unmourned, and he was not buried with the kings. He was not buried with honor, nor in Jerusalem with royalty before. The reign of Ahijah, or Jehoaz, name meaning sustained by Jehovah. He was weak and he was very evil. Ahijah was the 6th king of Judah, and he was 22 years old when he took the throne. He was dominated by his wicked mother, Athaliah, who was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. She was like her mother and her father, evil. His advisors were also part of the family of Ahab and Jezebel. They influenced him to rule in deep sin. Ahijah allied with Jehoram of Israel of the north, who was then at war with Syria at Ramoth Gilead. The southern army also went to battle with the king of the north, just like Jehoshaphat had gone with Ahab. So this southern king went with the northern king because evidently he went to visit him. Jehoram was wounded in battle and went to Jezreel to convalesce. Ahaz went to visit him, and while visiting, Elisha sent the prophet Jehu that we talked about before. You remember it from the northern kingdom, to anoint Jehu as king of Israel. But he had something he had to do, and that was to destroy the house of Ahab for their evil. The two kings met Jehu when he came in, and Jehoram was pierced through his heart, and Ahijah fled and was followed and wounded, and he died on the road to Megiddo. Both of these kings died that day. The northern king, the southern king. After slaying Ahab's household, Jehu set out for Samaria to complete the task. You remember that he killed all of the sons of Ahab. They were told, he told someone, cut their heads off, bring their heads. They put them at the gate of the city. I think there were 40 or maybe 50 of Ahab's sons that had their heads cut off. But he's going to go everywhere, killing the servants, the cousins, everybody that had Ahab's blood in them. And on the journey, he met 42 princes who were of the house of Jehoshaphat, but of Ahab as well. They met their doom. 42 were killed that day. The reign of Athaliah, very, very wicked. Her name meant due season for Yah, due season for God. When she heard that her son Ahijah was dead, she killed all the rest of her sons that might take his place, and she killed her grandchildren. Only one escaped, Joash. And again, this was part of the scourge of Ahab's family, I believe. Regrettably, this had to happen. But it happened. God didn't protect them because they were part of Ahab's family as well. But God protected one because of his covenant with David, that one of his seed would always be on the throne of Judah, of Israel. Joash, this young son, he was only a baby. When the killing was going on, this nurse stole him away while the slaying was taking place, and he was hidden in a storeroom of the temple for 6 whole years. Of course, Athaliah wouldn't dare go into the temple. She had no use for the temple. In fact, the temple had fallen into great disrepair, and he was hidden there and cared for by his nurse and an aunt and an uncle. While he, in his 7th year of the reign of wicked Athaliah, the high priest Jehoiada revealed Joash's existence to the officers of the land. And these officers traveled throughout the land of Judah, summoning Levites and tribal leaders to Jerusalem for a coronation of this little 7-year-old boy. The high priest said it was the time for God's promise to come to pass, that one of David's seed would always be on the throne of Israel. And so he placed these leaders and guards, soldiers, etc., in several places because they knew when Athaliah discovered that he was alive, of course she had people who were loyal to her. And they were placed at certain places to guard the temple, to guard the young king that's going to be anointed king. Levites were armed, acting as bodyguards for the new king. Fully armored officers formed a line across the front of the temple to protect him. The young king was brought out, and a crown was placed on his head. A copy of the 10 Commandments was placed in his hands as he was proclaimed king of Israel. He was anointed by the high priest, and a great shout arose. And they cried out, "Long live the king." Traditionally, this is what they always said at the coronation. And it was so loud that she heard. And she came to the temple and saw this young king surrounded by all of these army officers and trumpeters, etc. And the people were rejoicing. A great orchestra was and singing. They were singing praises to God. Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason!" And the priests commanded the officers to take her out of the temple and slay her. Anyone trying to aid her would also be killed. A scripture comes to mind: when the righteous rule, people rejoice. But when the evil rule, they will mourn. That really is true. The high priest and the people covenanted to serve the Lord. The people went out and knocked down the temple of Baal. They broke up the altars and the idols, and they killed the prophets of Baal. The high priest appointed Levite guards and ordered that priests sacrifice to God. He renewed David's assignments. Levites sang while priests worked. Joash was ushered to the palace by the people, the officers, the nobles, and the governors, and the land rejoiced and rested after Queen Athaliah was dead. Joash was fair to good because he made some bad mistakes. He had good advice in the beginning, and when the high priest died, he got some bad advice. And remember, he had a little bit of Ahab and Jezebel in him too. Yeah, he did. But the grace of God was with him. 7-year-old Joash ruled 40 years. The high priest instructed him in the ways of the Lord. He's 7 years old. Joash also made the mistake of not destroying the shrines in the hills. So people sacrificed and burned incense there. He told the high priest to restore the temple that had pretty much fallen into some ruin. In fact, it had almost been destroyed by Athaliah and her son before her. She had also taken precious vessels out of the temple and put them in the temple of Baal. The young king commanded the Levites to travel over the kingdom and collect tithes and gifts as Moses had commanded, and this would finance the repairing of the temple. Interesting. After 20 years, he asked the high priest and others why the temple had not been restored. 20 years go by. So he ordered it done immediately. Priest made a large chest. It was placed in the temple for contributions. Construction began after they had collected their monies. The high priest died at the age of 130 years. Afterward, leaders convinced the king to stop worshiping God and to turn to idols. God sent prophets that tried to turn the people back to God. The priest's son, Zechariah, this is not the Zechariah that wrote the book of Zechariah in the Restoration period. This was a prophet. Zechariah called the people together to warn them that God would surely forsake them. But they refused to listen, and they plotted to kill this prophet. So Joash ordered the death of the prophet. The prophet priest prayed that God would avenge the death of this prophet Zechariah. Soon afterward, Syrians conquered Judah and Jerusalem. They slew leaders and they stole riches. Joash was wounded. After they departed, 2 officers his own officer killed him in his own bed. This took place because he killed Zechariah the prophet and forgot God. He was not buried with the kings, and his son Amaziah took his place. Let's take a little bit earlier break, because we're going to do a lot of reading. We're going to study the prophet Joel when you come back, so we can finish that in the last half. So take about 20 minutes.